Welcome to Enchanted Astrology with Ariel Smith. Thank you for joining as we are going to unpack the astrology for the week ahead. Now, this week we have Venus entering Leo on June 13th, where she will immediately form a sextile to Uranus in Gemini. And we are also seeing something interesting with the four main asteroids, which are Pallas, Ceres, Juno, and Vesta. Now, they each represent different aspects of the feminine. Traditionally, astrology focused mostly on the moon and Venus for feminine representation. But when these asteroids were discovered, they revealed more feminine themes that are often quieter, more internal, and not always visible. As feminine or yin energy is not always loud, active, or expressive, it can go unnoticed. And especially if there is more of a focus on that masculine energy, as we've seen through, the many years under a patriarchal structure. Now, Pallas Athena, or Pallas, is an asteroid that represents the feminine creative intellect that prefers to problem solve without dominance, war, or violence. So it's like the queen's advice, kind of, that understands so much more nuance and gives advice to the king, and that advice is incredibly wise and helpful and considerate and ultimately successful, but it goes unnoticed or uncredited. It's that type of a feminine strategy and intellect. Ceres is the archetype of the nurturing mother. It's how we give and receive support, as well as how we work with cycles of loss. Now, support is something, again, that can go largely unnoticed. I worked in human resources for 15 years, and as a department that functions as a support role, the mindset is to support the success of the active teams, but it operates quietly in the background. And it deals with cycles of loss, how we handle those moments with care and grace for the loss occurring. Loss is something we tend to hide. We deal with loss very discreetly, and it's just not something that we talk about openly very often, even though it's something we all go through. And Juno is the archetype of the committed partner. So it is the partner who is loyal and dedicated, and how we find equality in our relationships, the kinds of partnerships that we form, and how power dynamics in those relationships play out. Now, Hera is an example of an archetype for this. And if you are less familiar with Hera than you are with perhaps her husband Zeus, that just proves the point. Because we vaguely know about Hera in general, but maybe not as much as we know about Zeus. We definitely know about Zeus. And there is, a saying under the patriarchy that behind every successful man is a great woman. I'm sure we've all heard that one. Obviously, this is very dated and patriarchal, but it gives you an idea of what Juno represents, and how that quiet feminine strength in the background has traditionally gone unnoticed. And it is one half of the relationship dynamic that has traditionally gone unnoticed. And this is not specifically in any way just talking about male or female. This is a masculine feminine expression, and that feminine half being the quieter, softer half, typically going unnoticed, especially under the patriarchy. And finally, we have Vesta, which is our spiritual devotion. So if we think of this devotion in a feminine expression, like a nun or a priestess, one who channels even their sexuality into a devoted spiritual focus. So maybe they take a vow of celibacy. Vesta is what we fully dedicate ourselves to, mind, body, and spirit. And again, feminine spiritual devotion has not been as highlighted as masculine devotion. We even have seen instances where women are not allowed to engage in spiritual devotion in the same way as men, for example. And so here we have all 4 of these asteroids in air and fire signs, which are the masculine or yang energy signs. So they are outward, initiating, and expressive. So we have these traditionally softer behind the scenes, receptive, more sustaining energies in these asteroids that are expressing in a much more active way. So none of these are in a water or earth sign. So these divine feminine forces are not sitting on the sidelines. They are not remaining quiet behind the scenes in the shadows. They are not in a passive state right now. They are expressing in a very active and initiating way, which is needed right now, to be honest, because we don't want to rebuild the same world over again. The one where the feminine perspectives were not honored or involved in the decision making. We've already seen how that plays out, and we're not going back to that experience. So we have all these major divine feminine forces taking a much more active role right now, taking that initiative and making sure that the feminine perspective is included in what we are building next. So we want a more holistic model where both masculine and feminine qualities are equally incorporated, where they sustain and support each other, work together in a way that honors both sides, just like the in-breath and the out-breath, right? You need both. So not only are they in fire and air signs, but this week they are also in supportive aspects to each other. So they are working together. They are on the same page and working closely with 2 very influential, traditionally masculine forces of Saturn and Pluto. So we have Pallas and Vesta surrounding Saturn this week with a conjunction at 13 degrees of Aries. Pallas is a little bit ahead, pulls away or separates this week as it goes on. Vesta's a little bit behind and catches up this week. We also have Pallas, Vesta, and Saturn in a trine with Juno in Aquarius, and Juno is now separating from a conjunction to Pluto in Aquarius. And that Juno in Aquarius is also in trine with Ceres in Gemini, as Ceres is separating from her conjunction to Uranus. So they're all in supportive aspects with one another. Juno was conjunct Pluto back in April at 5 degrees of Aquarius. And remember, Juno is our commitment in relationship, how we form relationships and commit to them, and how we work with power dynamics in those relationships. And Pluto is all about power dynamics, because Pluto is interested in what power dynamics reveal underneath the surface. So usually power dynamics signal something hidden that is driving our motivation. So whether that is fear, suppression, trauma, or something like that. And when these are conjunct, those power dynamics in Pluto are experienced through our relational agreements. So this is the question like, is the agreement equal and is it fair? What am I looking for in an agreement? Is it coming from, are my expectations coming from a deeply unconscious place? And we know that genuine love is completely free and unconditional. And as soon as we try to restrict, judge, or place conditions upon something, we are not acting in love. And this is Aquarius and Pisces territory. So if we are here to ultimately learn about love, because love is who we are, and the zodiac wheel can represent our journey back to love, Aquarius is the second last stop on that wheel before we get to Pisces, the sign of unconditional love. And Aquarius is where we learn about love's freedom. So it accepts all and will not control, limit, or contain, as it seeks freedom in love, because love ultimately is freedom. So when you freely choose a relational agreement because it is what you want most, there are no hidden power dynamics driving this choice, like maybe a need for approval or acceptance, or a wound or trauma. Aquarius will enter into an agreement fully aware and with its full sovereignty and freedom of choice intact. So Aquarius is fixed air and can be incredibly loyal, but that loyalty is out of its own relationship to love and not out of obligation or fear of consequence. So you could be feeling a pull toward this kind of relational agreement. You could be seeing these relational power dynamics more clearly for what they are and what they represent. It can become clear where you are not choosing out of freedom and where fear is setting the terms of a relationship. Obviously, things like mutual respect, care, and consideration are basic qualities of a healthy relational dynamic, but maybe some terms that you've been carrying around and clinging to have been out of fear of what will happen if you allow yourself to relax some of those heavier expectations. So this is where you could be feeling that you have decided to let something go that you've always held close for safety, or you've allowed more trust to enter into your agreements than you ever thought possible before. So that is ultimately what this Juno-Pluto energy is seeking. Now, this is in trine with Ceres in Gemini. And Ceres, again, is how we nurture, give, and receive support, show care, and connect with cycles of loss. And Gemini is a light and playful energy. It is curious and it is interested in a variety of perspectives. It wants to communicate and share information. And it also likes using humor as a way to lift and elevate the energy so it doesn't become overly heavy and it can move along through. So during Ceres' journey in Gemini, you could be feeling more of a need to keep things lighter, more playful. It's like this energy that doesn't take itself overly seriously. So as we are seeking more freedom and expressions of genuine love in our relationships, Ceres and Gemini is the energy that will move through the worst case scenario thinking, move that along through with things like humor, different possibilities, and lightness. So Gemini represents potentials, and Gemini knows that all potentials simultaneously exist. But what brings a potential into form in an experience of physical manifestation and density is repeatedly focusing on it, nourishing it. So Ceres here only wants to nourish what is beneficial. So if there is a worry, a fear, or a potential that we don't want, Gemini knows that the best thing we can do is not to focus on it, not to give it weight, and to choose to focus on what feels better. And this is done through the mind in Gemini, through using different perspectives to align the mind to what it wants to sustain. So as an example, maybe a partner takes a few hours to reply, and a worry can start to show up based in fear. The worry can look like a thought, maybe they're losing interest. Oh my goodness, maybe something's wrong. And Gemini can bring in so many different potentials and perspectives to help here. So Gemini can say, well, let's just a minute here. Maybe they just got distracted, or maybe they're just really busy. My sister, as an example, can be notorious for late replies. And because her life can be quite chaotic, I always think of something funny that could be interfering with her ability to reply. Like maybe her phone died and her son is running around the house with the charger and she can't catch him. I don't know. Or maybe she put the phone down for 10 seconds and her life immediately generated 3 additional side quests. So someone's calling her, something starts to boil over, and a package is arriving at the door all at once. And it's a different alternative that can bring lightness to what the mind can otherwise try to latch onto in the frequencies of worry and fear. So Gemini can understand that life moves quickly and there are many possibilities and potentials available. Not just the scary story that we have as our go-to on repeat that is based in trauma and fear, and this story that tells us that we are not loved, that something is wrong, or that someone has a problem with us. So Ceres in Gemini can be incredibly nurturing through having a selection of stories available, and we choose the one that feels the best. So what story nourishes me? And it doesn't even matter which one is true. Gemini doesn't really care about needing to know the ultimate objective truth. Gemini is an energy that knows all potentials can exist. And the more it focuses on one of those potentials, the more likely it is to become truth. So might as well choose the story that is helpful and nourishing and focus on that. Now, not only is Juno in trine to Ceres in Gemini, Juno is also in a sextile to Pallas, Vesta, and Saturn in Aries. Now, Saturn is the design of this realm we call Earth. It represents the boundaries, the limitations, and the overall design of our experience. And the ultimate limitation that we gave ourselves was the veil, to which we created an experience where we caused ourselves to forget who we are. So we chose to go through an experience of limiting ourselves to be able to experience ourselves through the journey of what we are not. And in that journey, we discover more of what we are. So we have this constructed reality, and this reality unfolds in or through the process of time. And Saturn is the timekeeper, the architect of this realm. And why did we choose such a crazy thing? Well, because of our soul's devotion. So our soul wanted to know itself through this experience. And in this dedication, it took on a massive limitation in order to achieve this. Now, when we are not aware of how this construction works, we are at the mercy of its rules. But as we gain experience and we become more conscious, we are able to better understand the design and even remove some of those limitations to better work with it. And this is where Vesta and Pallas come in. Now, this is all about our own individual authority and our own soul. And as we align more and more with our soul, we can interact with the construct in a more fluid way with less experience of the restrictions. And we do this to serve the soul and ultimately serve our higher purpose. So, as an example, just to try to convey what I mean here, my modern archetype for Pallas Athena is Hermione Granger. So I always think of Hermione from Harry Potter when I think of Pallas, because Hermione just embodies that level of mental processing, her ability to think her way through problems, to see patterns, and just how strategic of a mind she has. And this is the energy of Pallas. So a perfect example of how this intellect works, like in the Philosopher's Stone, when they get caught in the devil's snare, option one might be to panic and try battling your way out of the grasp of the vines through strength and domination. But Hermione uses her wisdom and intellect to problem solve and remembers that if you can relax, it will release the vine's hold on you. So it's like, how do I solve a problem clearly and cleanly without creating a bunch more problems or even a bigger mess? So that is the core of Pallas Athena. And here she is conjunct Saturn in Aries, where Saturn is the construct. Saturn teaches us discipline and mastery, and how this whole experience of remembering who we are unfolds within time, and ultimately how we use that time. So Saturn is also about consequences and the limitations that we are working around. So this conjunction reminds me of Hermione using the time turner in The Prisoner of Azkaban. So initially, she is limited by time. But as she grows more into herself and her sovereignty, she understands that even time is something that can be worked with in different ways. So she uses the time turner initially to manage a course schedule where she needs to be in two places at once. Obviously impossible, but not with the time turner. And then she ends up using it to spare 2 lives. But there are restrictions and consequences. You can only travel back a few hours at a time. You absolutely must not be seen by your past self. Major changes in history are essentially off limits. And everything that happens in the past is already part of history, and so it cannot be rewritten. So Saturn is the timekeeper, the rules and restrictions. And here comes Pallas, aka Hermione, saying, I honor those rules and restrictions and take my responsibility to uphold them very seriously, but that doesn't mean I can't use my highly strategic mind and my desire to uphold what is right in order to work some magic within these rules. And that will end up being to the benefit of all to achieve the highest outcome. And that is exactly what Hermione does. And Vesta here represents our devotion and dedication on a level that feels spiritually significant. Vesta is what we fully commit ourselves to, in almost like a sacred contract. And there's no breaking that because it involves our soul. So it is where we feel the importance of our duty here on a spiritual level. We sense that our actions affect more than just us, and we feel a sacred duty not only to our soul, but in how we serve others in this design as well. So you, being the most authentic version of yourself, not only serves you and your soul, but it serves everyone, as that's how this construct was designed. So as we step more fully into love, we consciously form relational agreements based in love, and we live from a place of love. We come more into alignment with our soul and are able to navigate this design a little more freely under our soul's guidance and direction. And we can build a world that reflects more of who we are through the help and participation of these feminine energies. But this takes devotion. It's something we fully commit ourselves to, like a spiritual practice that connects us with our higher self and ultimately with God. And the more devoted you stay to your own connection to your soul, the more freedom that seems to come online for you. And if you want to build a different world, it takes devotion to that world, believing in it, and living it within yourself before it will show up on the external. Now, at the start of this week, Mercury in Cancer is squaring this Pallas Saturn Vesta stellium in Aries, because the more the mind wants to jump in, the less we have access to these energies. So the lower mind will want to interfere, bring up worry and doubt and limiting beliefs that have just sort of stuck with you, that you inherited. Because Cancer is a sign associated with the past, what we inherit, and how we stay safe. So the more we entertain the habitual thinking mind, the less we will be in the higher mind or soul's intelligence with that Pallas in Aries. Now, this will be strongest at the start of this week, but it separates as the week goes on. So it could just be initial mental noise that eventually quiets down as you continue to step more into alignment with your soul. Now, we also have Venus entering Leo on June 13th, where she will stay until July 9th when she moves on to Virgo. So for just under a month, she will be moving through the sign of Leo, and this is a fierce Venus. This is where Venus wants to experience love and the greatness of it. Not just feel it, but actually experience it. She is loyal and generous in love, and she wants to express that. And this is great timing because this is taking us more into an experience of authentic love and learning to show up and live from that place. Now, of course, the challenge here is to notice if there are any conditions or expectations tied to these generous displays of love and affection, as that would not be coming from a deeply genuine place. But that shadow side of Leo can feel incredibly hurt if others are not mirroring back to it the level of enthusiasm that it feels. And this is the polarity of Aquarius and Leo, where Aquarius love is so free. It can sometimes struggle to be personal, warm, and affectionate because there can be a lot of space in Aquarius energy. So it genuinely loves, but it can struggle with the demonstration of love. Whereas Leo absolutely loves to demonstrate its love and affection, but it can struggle with expectations and demonstrations that need to look a certain way in order to be valid. So not always a lot of freedom in how it's expressed. But when they balance, we have a love that is authentic, genuine, and free. We have a love that is deeply devoted, warm, and generous, but expresses that in a way without expectations of how it needs to look on the outside, because it's just centered in the heart, and the heart is open wide when they are balanced. And so Venus is going to eventually move closer to her opposition to Pluto when she reaches 5 degrees of Leo, which will be next week. And I will discuss that aspect next week, as it also involves Neptune and Uranus. But this week, she makes a sextile to Uranus and Gemini on June 15th. And this is where we may see some variety and surprises in how that Venus wants to boldly express love in Leo. But this is also a perfect representation of that principle we were discussing earlier, how genuine love is completely free, because Uranus will not be contained and requires independence and room to evolve. And Venus wants to be warm, romantic, loyal, and loving. And this is where she gets to express that in a way that is not demanding or restrictive, but a way that is completely unbound and free of expectations. So this is loud, warm, generous love without expectation. And the experience of that may surprise you. When we don't have any expectations, we tend to be more pleasantly surprised than, say, if we were holding on to an idea of how things ought to be. And that is Uranus wisdom. The more open you are, the more potential ways something can come to you that are pleasant and surprising. Whereas the more closed we are, the less available options, and the ones that are available may not always be the most pleasant. So this week's Yin Yoga class is aligned with this Venus-Uranus trine. And it just offers a way to explore this energy through the body in a very open-hearted, receptive state. So we'll focus on softening into possibility, creating space to be receptive to what's emerging, while at the same time gently releasing the expectations and emotional weight that can actually keep us closed off from what is ready to arrive. So if that calls to you, that is available at enchantedastrology.ca through the Yin Yoga Studio. Now, as always, thank you so much for listening in. I wish you a pleasantly surprising week ahead, and I will be back next Wednesday with another episode.